Good evening. Today is July 31st, 2021. I'm Robert Cressionnie.
I'm John Gatsis.
And you've just tuned in for an hour of America in Danger. Well, it's hard to believe we're at July 31st.
It really
already.
is incomprehensible.
We are nearly through the dog days of summer.
Yeah, and today is definitely one of those dog days. My observations
is.
outside.
Absolutely is. I was hesitant to use that phrase, though, because I didn't want to offend anyone who identifies as a dog.
Right, our fellow canine Americans.
Yes, fellow canine Americans.
If you declare yourself as a canine American, we have to respect that.
That's exactly right. We have to respect that. In this age of wokeness, we really need to be cognizant of those who might take offense. Identifies cats, dogs, horses.
Didn't one of the PETA representatives, wasn't one of her famous phrases, a dog is a cat, is a dolphin, is a tuna, is a boy, something along those lines? I don't think she I don't think she realized exactly how prescient what she was saying would become. But that's really the mantra of the day now. I think they can recycle that and spin it out and use it for the whole. Trans, LGBTQ, XY, QWERTY,
whatever you want to be.
Whatever.
Whatever you want to be. Whatever you want to be. When we have such abstract constructs that people are using.
Well, I think it's analogous to a cartoon world. Anything's possible in the cartoon world.
In the cartoon world.
That's kind of the way I think about it now. Things get blown up and they reconstruct in 2 seconds to the next scene, and you defy gravity, and
children save the world.
All the above. That's right.
All the above. Well, tonight I would like to talk a little bit about China.
I think it's an important topic.
China's in the news, and we certainly have a media and a government that's filled with people covering for China.
And an academic
and academia, absolutely.
Establishment, yeah.
Academia is receiving millions and millions of dollars in grants and research and what have you. And of course, all of those scientists and academians who are engaging in that research are obligated to provide that information to China.
Well, they're largely spies.
They're largely spies.
And now they just operate out in the open.
That's right. And we've had several who've been convicted of essentially espionage.
Correct. You got these Confucius Institutes on our campuses around the country, and they're buying up farmland, the Chinese.
Yes, they are.
At an unprecedented rate, which ought to, concern people maybe, a little bit.
It should, and we saw Mark Robinson speak the other night,
right,
in Raleigh, and it was interesting. And unfortunately, he didn't have time for a lot of questions, because one of the questions should have been, how does he feel about the Chinese influence in North Carolina's universities? Because there is influence there. We know there is. But I'd like to start with a little bit of history of China, because a lot of people don't know a whole lot about China. China's a pretty closed book.
Always worth reviewing history and fundamentals. Even if you know the subject, it's worth. there's some things on that list that I had forgotten or never knew.
Absolutely.
And so I'm absolutely all for that.
Way back in 1921, 100 years ago, seems like only yesterday.
And they just celebrated that 100-year.
They absolutely did.
Centennial.
Absolutely did. And we had politicians actually wishing them a happy 100th.
Yeah, I know.
Unbelievable.
Right.
But the Communist Party was formed in China in 1921. In 1925, Chiang Kai-shek formed the Nationalist Party and seized power. Now, Chiang was a very enthusiastic anti-communist.
He was a white hat, that's right.
He was very much opposed to the Communist Party because he saw it for what it was.
He's a Christian.
Yes, he was. Now, in 1927, the Nationalists stormed Shanghai, and they destroyed the communist base, and they killed every communist found in the city. Now,
he obviously grew some more.
Obviously so, because in 1931, they had to do it all over again.
Right.
So evidently they didn't get them all the first time.
It's a weed.
Communism is like weeds. They pop up all over your garden. In 1934, Mao Zedong began employing guerrilla tactics to fight the nationalists, and they commenced on what they call the Long March.
Right.
I can't remember how many miles they traveled. It was 6,000 miles or some ungodly number that they marched while the nationalists pursued them.
They named one of their big missiles, the Long March missile.
Yep.
That's one of their,
And so anyway, ultimately, the Chinese and the communists and the nationalists formed an alliance when Japan invaded
Right.
to fight the Japanese, because the Japanese were absolutely brutal to the Chinese people.
Right. They sort of suspended their civil war in China
They were unthinkably brutal toward the Chinese. In fact, they entered Nanking and murdered half the occupants of the city over 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's known as the Rape of Nanking. You might have heard of that.
I have too.
Of course, in 1939, World War II began, and we were allied with the Chinese because of what the Japanese had done to them.
Right.
Now, when World War II ended, their civil war picked right back up.
Correct.
And ultimately, in 1949, the nationalist forces were forced to flee to Taiwan.
Right, which then was known as Formosa.
Formosa, that is correct. And they set up shop there while the communists basically took over mainland China.
That's right.
Now, a lot of people recognize Chiang Kai-shek as the legitimate government of the Republic of China.
And in fact, that's right. And if you look at things from Taiwan, I mean, their official name is Republic of China. And that's where I think a lot of people are confused or don't understand. But Taiwan is a Chinese country. It's Chinese in every way. If you're in Taiwan, you're in essentially a a part of China culturally and geographically. And of course, the communists, they just view it as a rogue province.
Right.
Okay, they have claims on it, and I think they fully intend to act on those claims, and that's going to be a real test.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
Geopolitically speaking.
And we do know that when Chiang set up shop there, he wanted to go back to the mainland and rout the communist Chinese.
Well, that's correct.
And of course, our President Harry Truman, much as John Kennedy did with the Cubans, he let the Taiwanese people down.
That's right.
Or the Chinese down.
The communists wouldn't have been successful without some Western assistance.
Exactly. In fact, he parked the Sixth Fleet between Formosa and mainland China to prevent that. And Chiang didn't want assistance as far as manpower. He just wanted weapons.
Yes.
And we could have easily supplied that and probably would have precluded the Korean War.
Absolutely.
And prevented all those deaths.
And Taiwan became an economic powerhouse for many years throughout the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. They far surpassed mainland China in terms of economic output. That tiny little island.
Yeah, they did. I remember when I was a kid that a lot of things came with the tag, made in Taiwan.
That's right.
A lot of things came made in. In fact, I remember Mardi Gras beads because I was living in New Orleans at that time, and they all had the little wrapper on them that said made in Taiwan. Now, in 1950, the Chinese sent troops to aid North Korea, thus starting the Korean conflict. It wasn't a war, it was a conflict. We never declared
action,
war.
I believe they called it.
It was the United Nations police action, as every war since the World War II has been.
Right, a war in which our objective has never quite been to win.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
In the traditional sense, anyway.
Absolutely. Now, in 1957, the 100 Flowers period begins under Mao, and if you want to explain a little bit about what that was.
Well, maybe, you're going to have to explain that a little bit, because I know roughly that that was basically an economic program to try and say, okay, we're going to I've always heard it as let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Right.
And that's a misnomer, that's a misquote.
Correct. Well, what it was, this was all part of Mao's plan. It was predetermined that he wanted to rout anyone critical of the Communist Party.
Right.
If you read his little red book, he's all about criticism of the Communist Party to make it better.
I see. So it was a way of outing the counter-revolutionaries.
Exactly.
Right.
So he went out about encouraging people to give their opinions. Subsequently, that went on for 2 years. He developed sufficient list at that point in time to execute a huge purge in China and murdered untold millions who had spoken out against the Communist Party.
It's not unlike what we discussed on last week's show, where with our betrayal of the Cubans at the Bay of Pigs essentially outed the counter-revolutionaries among the Cubans, and they rounded them up and slaughtered them. Put them in jail, exiled them, disappeared them.
And that is a common tactic. by the way.
Definitely.
That's not the only time. That's not the only two times in history that has occurred.
That's right.
It was the same with the Polish, with the Romanians, with a lot of the satellite nations. They were encouraged to have a strong underground resistance. And at a certain point, it was like, yeah, come on out, we're going to have people to support you and help take your country back. And the support never showed up, just like the Bay of Pigs.
Right, right.
And thus all of those patriots, all of the underground was killed off. Now, in 1971, Taiwan had a seat in the United Nations.
Yes, we recognized them as the legitimate government of China. That's how we viewed that diplomatically and geopolitically.
Yes, we did. And unfortunately, it was given to China.
Right.
To communist China.
Right. That was a big betrayal. That was big. That was big in the day, because I remember when that happened. I was young, but my father was in the military, and I was involved in peripherally in some of that. In fact, I think he went to Taiwan at one point during that period, and he told the leaders there. He said, you're getting ready to get thrown under the bus.
Yeah. And they were.
Yeah.
And they were. And shortly thereafter, 1972, Richard Nixon, first president to visit China in many, many, many years, walks in and is hailed as a great innovator and forward-looking individual who would bring the nations together.
Right.
What he did, he basically handed the communist Chinese the keys to the city.
Yeah.
He absolutely did. Now, Mao Zedong died in 1976. In 1994, because of basically universal outcry of China's abuse of human rights, they lost the Olympic Games of 2000.
I remember that.
That was taken away from them, and rightly so. Now, in 2002, they joined the World Trade Organization, which, in my opinion, the World Trade Organization is not worth this piece of paper right here.
Yeah.
It's actually worth less, because this has some toner on it, so that would definitely
give us that's right, added value there to that over the World Trade Organization. Well, the World Trade Organization is just that. It's an instrument for global governance and global financial apparatus and machinations, I'll say.
Yep.
And
much like the WHO,
that's right. That's correct.
Who actually covered for China in this COVID thing.
Right.
And they have since admitted they covered for it.
Wasn't in the during the Clinton years, wasn't that when China was granted most favored nation trading status? That was a big one, and everybody recognizes, even some of the hand-wringing liberals of the period look at that retrospectively and say that was a mistake.
Yep.
That was I have a hard time accepting an explanation on their part. Well, we were naive. We didn't quite understand. I saw it. I was 30. I understood it. I said, this is a bad idea. These are bad actors. Yep. Why would you put them in a position to acquire and attain international prominence and trading, favored trading status in the international trade establishment? It's just incomprehensible that was done, and we're seeing some of the results of that now.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. Well, China is currently under the rule of Xi Jinping. I had to look that up, how to pronounce it.
Yeah, Xi Jinping, yes.
And there are several pronunciations in the English language, but that was obviously done by a Chinese individual, so I figured that was as close as anything.
My favorite joke is they call Joe Biden Joe
Jinping.
Xiden, Xiden.
Well, I would tend to believe that. I'm surprised he hasn't adopted a Chinese middle name or something at this point. In 1980, China's total GDP was under $90 billion.
Right.
Today, it's over 12 trillion.
Correct. Right.
Thanks to the U.S. and many things that we've done to encourage U.S. companies to go over there and utilize slave labor.
Slave labor, in combination with China's unrelenting IP theft, intellectual property theft. Any company that goes over there to do business is forced to hand over their plans, their designs. Yeah. And, we've discussed that ad nauseum on this show, that, if you're in business in China, you're in business with the Chinese Communist government and really the Chinese military. That's right. That's the deal.
That's exactly right. If anybody sees these huge container ships coming over here with Costco on the side. The Chinese Ocean Shipping Company. Well, that's a branch of the Red Army.
Right.
That is a shipping company run by the Red Army that brings all of our goods here to the U.S. that we help subsidize.
Right.
Now, China has plans to dominate the U.S., to dominate the world.
Well, and they've always had a long view.
Yeah, they play the long game.
They do. Now, one of the items, I don't know, it was on the list, but, Hong Kong. Okay, and I think it's important to mention that in 1997, China took over control of Hong Kong. Per agreement, I mean, Hong Kong was a British protectorate, and of course, anybody who knows anything about recent history knows that Hong Kong was one of the most friendly, thriving, free market, business-oriented, successful, and prosperous regions on the planet. Okay, it was a jewel, and the Chinese entered into an agreement that, by treaty predating the communist takeover of China, there was an agreement that Britain, the UK, would relinquish control of Hong Kong to the communists. But they agreed that they would essentially have a hands-off policy and they would let Hong Kong continue as is for 50 years. Okay, now that was 1997. Now we all know what happened with Hong Kong just last year. The Chinese communists cracked down, they've shut down all the free newspapers, they've jailed all the people who they consider dissidents, and they completely abrogated the treaty obligation that they had under that original agreement. Now that right there should tell people where the modern mentality and state of mind of Chinese leadership is. They're a criminal enterprise. They have no interest in abiding by any treaties in which they engage. And this notion, this misguided notion that leaders in our country have had for the past 30, 40 years, and I'm suspicious, I'm cynical enough to say it's not misguided. They know exactly what they're doing. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for this discussion and say it was misguided. That somehow China can be brought into the community of nations if we just accept them and they trade with them on equal terms. They are thieves, they're liars, they're murderers. Okay, they run a communist dictatorship. They execute people at will. Okay, anybody who thinks that they are a model, okay, on which we should emulate, have absolutely no concept or clue what they are talking about.
That is absolutely correct. Now their plan is to dominate the globe by 2049. They don't want to just influence it. They want to dominate it. They want to control everything. And basically, over the last 20, 30 years, as you were saying, we've essentially given them everything they need to do that.
Correct. And now, in case, you have to really, really suspend your disbelief not to recognize that the actions of our current leadership are those of people who actually, I think, answer more to Chinese hegemonic objectives than they do the interests of the United States. I think we have actually almost a Manchurian a slate of Manchurian candidates, as it were, in our government. I think there's so much. I think there's so much corruption with respect to our political class and what they get out of China. Even a lot of Republicans, I think, are lining their pockets with Chinese dirty money. That's my take on it, and that's what I believe.
I agree, and of course, our Department of Justice has done nothing to investigate the Biden connection to China.
Right.
Where Hunter, an inexperienced, with no prior experience in finance, went to China and landed a $1 billion hedge fund deal.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Right. Or is selling art to the tune of $500,000 a pop to unknown Chinese investors and art. That is such an overtly, patently obvious money laundering scheme that I think either people are stupid in this country or they're so cynical they said, well, what are we going to do? We don't care. That's how it is. And that's the sign of a declining nation.
It is. It's a result of complacency and luxury and comfort, and,
That's correct.
People no longer feel that they have to work for anything.
That's right.
So they can destroy the institutions and the lifestyles of everyone else.
Agreed.
And that leads us to one of the quotes in Mao's Little Red Book. This is a printout of Mao's Little Red Book that you may have heard about. When we come back from break, I'm going to read this. I'd hoped to cover this by the break, but
I think this is an important enough topic that
I think so. So
we can go along and spill over into the next segment.
there you go. So stay tuned for more America in Danger. We'll be right back after this.
Hey, this is John Woodruff with Premier Equipment Company of Rocky Mountain Infield. If you've been shopping for a zero-turn mower lately, you've probably noticed that inventory is getting hard to come by. So come on down and see what we've got. We've got a showroom full. We have a showroom full of Exmark and Grasshopper zero-turn mowers, everything from commercial to residential, everything in between. We've got good relationship with our distributors. They tell us when we sell these, they've got more on the way. If you've been in the market for a zero-turn mower, come see me, John Woodruff from Premier Equipment.
Premier Equipment is open during the week from 8 to 5:30 and on the weekends from 8 to 12.
Rocky Mount Prep is currently seeking 9th grade students interested in getting a head start on college and career. Beginning in August 2021, Rocky Mount Prep's College and Career Academy will allow students to begin earning free college and career credits from Nash Community College and North Carolina Wesleyan College while enrolled in high school. The Academy will also provide students who are interested in pursuing the military with an opportunity to gain both course and hands-on training that will prepare them to become a military officer. Enroll by August 9th for the College and Career Academy at rmprep.org.
Are you afraid to answer the phone because of bill collectors? A Chapter 13 plan can help. Chapter 13 allows people with too many bills to work out a debt repayment plan under federal law. It helps you control your debts instead of your debts controlling you. Chapter 13 stops creditors from harassing you and stops repossessions and foreclosures. It allows you to answer the phone again without fear or worry. Call H. Frank Allen, attorney at law, a debt relief agency providing bankruptcy relief under the Bankruptcy Code.
Seem to be having a little technical difficulty with the web feed. Hopefully we can resolve that.
Certainly hope so.
Unless we've been blocked by the internet, which could be.
Certainly plausible these days.
It is certainly plausible. And I've got Mao's Little Red Book here, and Mao wrote this book as a somewhat of a guide.
A primer, as it were.
Yeah, because all of these lack of a better term, demigods, have to publish something, whether it's Muhammad or Mao or anyone else. They always want to, or even Obama, they want to publish things as a guide for their philosophies.
Right.
Okay.
Sort of a how-to book on how to implement their brilliant worldview.
Exactly. So I want to read this quote from his book, because that's all this is. It's a book of quotes of Mao, which, we know that many people, especially Hannah Nicole Jones, loves the Little Red Book.
Absolutely, as does Anita Dunn, one of Obama's policy advisors, claimed Mao was her favorite political philosopher. So put that in your little,
Well, that confirms right there that we have communists within our government.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it.
That's correct. They are communists.
But Mao had this to say about liberals, and it's interesting. So think about this. He said, people who are liberals look upon the principles of Marxism as abstract dogma. They approve of Marxism, but they are not prepared to practice it or to practice it in full. They are not prepared to replace their liberalism by Marxism. These people have their Marxism, but they have their liberalism as well. They talk Marxism, but practice liberalism. If they apply Marxism to others but liberalism to themselves, They keep both kinds of goods in stock and find a use for each. This is how the minds of certain people work. Now, if you think about the modern liberals that we have in this country.
And you don't have to think too hard.
You don't have to think too hard. They are quick to prescribe how we should live, how everyone else should live, how gun owners should live, how Trump supporters should live, how regular people should live, how conservatives should live. They want to send us to re-education camps and re-education schools. They control the schools right now, so they're basically re-education centers, indoctrination centers. But if you look at that, the liberals of today love to tell everyone how to live, but they themselves want to carry around their Apple cell phones, and they want to wear their designer clothes, all that are made in China using slave labor.
Well, at the even higher level, they certainly want to fly in their private jets while they tell us that we need to embrace, Marxist ideology in the form of global warming hysteria and climate, re-engineering of the economy, based on climate hysteria. And it's communism for thee and not for me.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
But that's always the case. I mean, again, we talk about Cuba; they're a good model, or Venezuela for that matter. Those countries comprise a very tiny slice of the population that are extremely wealthy, a billionaire class. I mean, you look at the net worth of the Castro family is very, very, very high. Everybody else is in abject poverty. That's the thing that I don't understand about the left. They whine and moan about corporations. Okay, and yet what is China? It's China Inc. What is Cuba? It's Cuba Inc. It's one big, basically, monopoly corporate structure with a corporation in the form of a nation state that has the guns, they have the monopoly on firepower, and they own the means of production by claiming that it's the people's means of production, but we will direct it and benefit from it. It's the biggest scam ever, people. Criminy. It's just amazing that people don't see through that. But they're scared to death that somehow, Exxon, and I'm no big shill for oil companies, but they're scared to death that some oil company is going to destroy the planet and do all these horrible. Well, they can't show up and put a gun in your face and haul you off to a camp, okay, because you said something they don't like or you've gone against the party line. And that's what these nitwits are advocating for. That's what they support, essentially, is that model. And they're too dumb to realize that that's what they're supporting.
Absolutely. Now, here's another quote from Mao, from his little red book. And I want you to picture a certain young female congresswoman from New York, I believe.
From Westchester County, actually.
With a rather prominent front grill.
I know.
I want you to picture her in some of the things that she says and see if you can hear these words coming from her mouth, though they be paraphrased a little bit. Mao said, "We shall solidly unite all the forces of our party on democratic, centralist principles of organization and discipline. We shall unite with any comrade if he abides by the party's program." Now, what has she said that is right along those same lines? That conservative Trump supporters need to be re-educated.
That's right.
And how many other communists in Congress have said that?
Many.
Very many. That is absolutely true.
Those paraphrased versions of those sentiments have emanated from the entire squad: Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, obviously AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Sandy Cortez, as we jokingly call her.
Sandy Cortez.
I gave her a break because I think she's just dumb. I really do. I just think I think she is extremely.
She developed her foreign policy chops, serving drinks in a bar.
That's right.
That's probably pretty good since Hunter became an oil expert and a hedge fund guru,
a magnate. That's right.
Doing crack cocaine.
That's right.
Hanging out with hookers.
And an artist. Suddenly he is an artist worthy of $500,000 per painting.
Outrageous, is it not? Is it not?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, we get into this a lot. I really do. I mean, I probably overthink this, but I'm always fascinated with the, you know, at the individual level, the psychology of what drives people to embrace these things. And there's a sliver of these people that they're just maniacal, they're power hungry, and I don't understand that psychology, but that's a different psychology. There's some kind of, that's a separate pathology I'm not equipped to understand. But I think largely the people that embrace this they're just malcontents. They're unhappy with the card they drew for various reasons, or they feel like the system is worked against them, or they're, you know, it's an angry at the world mentality. And so this kind of approach, is very seductive for them. Yeah. Okay, and it gives them a way to either feel important or to feel justified in their failures, or to simply exact a certain amount of revenge on those they perceive as having a better deal in life than they. And I think that largely animates, because I think that animates their psychology, because there's nothing, okay, there's no rational explanation, or there's no way to rationally justify the practices of these communists, and to try and implement that in this country is incomprehensible to me.
It is,
and that's what they're doing. I mean, they really are pushing this now in the open. Critical race theory is communism.
Oh yeah.
All of this whole human infrastructure bill that they're pushing, that's just overt communism. You know, that's all it is.
It is.
Yeah. Nobody's willing to say that.
Right.
Mark Robinson was a little bit the other night.
Yeah, Mark Robinson, I have to hand it to him. As a politician, I have zero trust for any of them.
Right, well, guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. But from what he said, and he unabashedly said that, yes, we have communists in our government.
In our Congress, that's right.
So anyone with the wherewithal to recognize that and to vocalize that, I have to give high marks.
Well, he certainly is. You know, I use the phrase about walking the walk, talking the talk, and walking the walk. He can certainly talk the talk. So there's a little, you know, walking the walk vetting that we have to see. But I certainly liked what I heard.
In fact, I made some notes from the talk.
Okay.
If I can get to them here. And some of the things that he said I thought were rather interesting. Now, some of them I'm not too sure about, but
I need a little more explanation.
That is correct. But he likened politicians to a self-licking ice cream cone. And I like that, because
I did too.
He kind of painted the picture that, well, you know, here are these people who present this on a hot summer day. They're going to give you this nice ice cream cone, except they're going to snatch it out of your reach because they're going to lick it themselves.
That's right.
Self-licking. The ice cream cones, they look good, they sound good, but you're not going to get any of the benefit.
Right, even though you created the ice cream cone.
Exactly.
That's the little subtlety there. You created the ice cream cone, the politicians took it, and then, you know, in the name of some grand, greater purpose, and then they really just are licking it themselves.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. Now, he went on to say that we need to get government out of the way and let private industry build the economy, and I fully agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm very much in favor of that.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the questions that I wanted to ask him, although we didn't have time because he was on a tight schedule, was why the state of North Carolina feels so compelled to gouge new small businesses in franchise fees and LLC fees and all of these fees and taxes that they have to pay. You know, we know that 90+% of business in this nation is small business.
Correct.
And government has nothing when a business doesn't exist. Once that business is in place, they're paying income tax, they're paying sales tax, they're contributing to the economy, they're providing jobs, and yet the state government, and this is all state governments, and this is the federal government as well.
All governments.
They feel like they're losing something if they don't gouge them of everything they can to slant the table so that it's just a major uphill battle to make that business successful. You know, in my mind, government would be better served to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're going to waive any income tax on your business for the first couple of years.
Correct.
Till you get well established, till you get employees, till you get your business built. We're going to waive some of these costs.
Yeah, more than the first couple of years, I think, frankly, because it takes more than a couple of years to establish a thriving, functioning business.
It does. At least the IRS gives you 5 years before you have to turn a profit.
Well, I mean, I don't think, first of all, to me, all taxes are ultimately paid by people. So the idea that you really probably shouldn't even have a corporate income tax.
I agree.
Or shouldn't have any kind of income
fully
tax.
agree. I fully agree.
But to the extent that, they try and they want to cultivate new businesses to set up shop in places, the best way to do that is to give them real tax breaks. Not some phony, 6-month moratorium
that's
or something.
right.
I mean, to really
give them a substantial tax break and say, hey, and one of the things Mark Robinson wanted to do was to develop the eastern seaboard of North Carolina. There's
Right,
a lot of
eastern part
land,
of
a
the
lot of
state, yeah.
potential. We've got a port down at Moorhead. We've got a port down at Wilmington.
highly underutilized.
Highly underutilized, and the port at Moorhead is difficult to access.
Right.
We don't have any major highways heading out to there. It's very difficult to get out to the port at Moorhead. We could do much more with that port if we had some highways to get out there. But he wants to develop that. And if that can be developed with a hands-off approach, government, take their hands off. Give people the opportunity to develop things without gouging every dime you can steal from them.
Well, in fact, the approach really almost needs to be analogous to like a homesteading kind of.
Absolutely.
They need to allow people, because really, it's not that there aren't natural resources in eastern North Carolina. You got to have people who are willing to take risk and who are willing to and will be allowed to bear the fruits of their labor and profit. And if you really allowed that, people would go in that region, they would set up shop and do amazing things.
They absolutely would. They absolutely would. And another thing that's near and dear to me, because of all of the sustainable development and the I can't remember what they call it, the geographic overlays of counties and cities and what have you. The government tends to go out of state for these sustainable development plans, for these growth plans, for all of these geographic overlay plans. They go out of state and they get these from some think tank or some other organization. Mark Robinson says, we've got talent here in North Carolina.
Right.
Let's develop that talent. I want to know why the county has to implement a plan that's developed in some other state.
Right.
Why the cities go to these seminars out of state and run by these communist facilitators to bring back a plan to implement here for some kind of cartoonish sustainable development plan.
Well, and all that is because all that is just in furtherance of government. If they really wanted, if they really wanted to enhance development, they wouldn't need much of a plan. They've got a very simple plan. It's called the free market. Low tax, low regulatory environment, which is another big one. That was Trump's bigger contribution to the economy. It wasn't so much the lowered taxes, although that was a big factor in lowering the corporate tax rate, but it was the massive scale back of regulatory authority.
Yes, it was.
As a thought experiment, think about what it would take to build the Hoover Dam or the Empire State Building or the Golden Gate Bridge. None of those projects could even be done today if they had even close to the regulatory environment that we have now.
That's exactly right. An interesting thing about when they built the Golden Gate Bridge, that was the first major use of safety nets.
Okay.
And they estimate that there were well over 100 people whose lives were saved. In fact, there was a club, I don't know that any of these people are alive these days, but there was a club of anyone who was saved by the safety net, and it was called the Halfway to Hell Club.
Yeah, that's entertaining. Interesting.
It was people who actually fell from the bridge and were saved by these nets.
Right.
Now, that was a major cost. That was almost $500,000 added to that project in that day.
Okay.
That was a significant cost.
Oh, absolutely.
But that wasn't a government mandate.
Right.
Guess who instituted that? The contractors building the bridge.
Right. Well, nobody wants people to
Exactly.
Right, but you have to balance the risk versus the reward,
Exactly.
and that's really the promise of our constitutional system and our system of individual liberty and individual rights. Is you get to balance the risk versus the reward.
That's right.
Using the maximum amount of liberty and the minimum amount of government intervention and oversight.
Exactly. And Mark Robinson, in closing, he said this, and this is somewhat paraphrased because I was trying to type it in.
Yeah, sure.
As he was speaking,
Sure.
but he said, North Carolina is the greatest state in the Union, but it can get better. Mm-hmm. He said, but not by communism, socialism, or Marxism. but by hard work of the citizens of North Carolina.
And I enjoyed hearing that, and I was also grateful that he seems to understand the threat that China represents,
does.
and that sort of takes us back full circle to our first segment, because
Yep.
I think I don't hear many in politics. In fact, when even Republicans get put on the spot about this, I see a lot of shifting around and looking around, like, oh well, we're kind of part of that deal too, and that's a fact, and that's because it's true.
Exactly. We got to take a little break. So I apologize tonight. The internet feed is down, unfortunately. So anyone trying to watch on the internet, my apologies. Hopefully we'll have that up and running soon. But we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some COVID stats.
Oh boy.
So stay tuned for more America in Danger.
This is Nicholas Bellamy at Premier Equipment. I'm going to talk about the 4540 Mahindra. It's 38 horsepower, full cylinder engine. The weight of this tractor is 4,000 pounds. This tractor is perfect for bush hogging, distance, small garden, a hunting club tractor. Comes with a 7-year warranty, 2-year bumper to bumper, additional 5-year on the powertrain. You can have this tractor for $200 a month, and we have 20 of these tractors in stock. Premier Equipment is open during the week from 8 to 5:30 and on the weekends from 8 to 12.
Are you afraid to answer the phone because of bill collectors? A Chapter 13 plan can help. Chapter 13 allows people with too many bills to work out a debt repayment plan under federal law. It helps you control your debts instead of your debts controlling you. Chapter 13 stops creditors from harassing you and stops repossessions and foreclosures. It allows you to answer the phone again without fear or worry. Call H. Frank Allen, attorney at law, a debt relief agency providing bankruptcy relief under the Bankruptcy Code.
All right, we're back, and we are in, what, about the 15th, 16th month of this COVID pandemic.
At the least, more like 18, isn't it?
It started up really in February, March.
I guess that's
20.
right. Yeah. Started hearing about it in China anyway.
Yep.
All roads lead back to China, it seems. On
yeah.
tonight's show anyway.
Yes, it does. Well, China, contrary to what some of the members of our government say, is a major threat.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that thinks China is simply a competitor is foolish, naive, and ill-informed. That's for sure. In the light of all this COVID, the variants.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Delta variant. We have an Indian variant, which I'm shocked that they named it the Indian variant.
Doesn't that? I know.
They're going to have to change that.
They didn't think that through.
No, they didn't. They're going to have to change that because the Indians might be offended.
They might be.
Both American and Indians.
That's right. We got to go down that road first and delineate between those two, and then so we should just assume that everybody's going to be offended.
Well, that's right. I'm offended.
That's right.
I'm offended. Well, Governor Cooper has released a state vaccine information card to allow residents to prove their vaccination status. And there is talk of further strengthening this COVID vaccination passport to the degree of being asked for your papers, please.
That's what it amounts to.
That's what it amounts to. And people who are more than willing to accept that, I don't understand that.
I don't either.
I don't understand that. Especially anyone who has taken the time to really look into the numbers. Now, I'm not a statistician.
Right.
I'm not a statistician. I'm not a virologist. I'm not a doctor. But I do have basic mathematics skills.
Right. And common sense.
So I went through and I pulled up some of the numbers that are readily available on the website, the HHS, CDC, FDA. And I got to looking at those numbers. And first of all, if you backtrack a little bit, you find that the numbers were over-reported. And the CDC is admitting that now.
Right.
And depending on where you look, those overestimates are anywhere from 10% to 50%. And these are precipitated by several things. One, in the early days, there was no accurate test because the SARS-CoV-2 genome and not viral strand RNA had not been isolated.
Right.
So there was nothing to compare to. So they developed the PCR test, which was considered the gold standard. Now the PCR test was developed using, guess what? A cold virus.
Right, which is a coronavirus.
And human cells, oftentimes,
Yeah.
yes. And human cells.
Right.
All right, so they proceeded to test widespread. I've had several of these 15-minute COVID tests. Fortunately, they've always come up negative. But there were conspiracy theories that possibly this test wasn't as accurate as they were portraying it.
I think Elon Musk was a high-profile recipient of the test, where he got negative one day and positive the next day, and
Exactly.
or positive one day and negative the next day. Yeah,
And that's happened quite a bit.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, I know someone that I work with who tested positive, had symptoms now, went down, took a test, tested positive. A day or two later, not once, but twice, he tested negative.
Well, haven't they decommissioned that test, or haven't they?
Well-
the FDA no longer have authorized emergency approval. They've rescinded their emergency approval. That's the way to say
Yeah.
that.
And so I went to the FDA website to look at what they were saying about this. And it's interesting because there are over 300 tests by various manufacturers, different pharmaceuticals, different outfits.
Okay.
Over 300 different brands of tests that have been rejected by the CDC. Now, these are all still in use. You know, if you go down and you get a 15-minute COVID test, that's what you're getting. You're getting one of those tests,
Right.
which is up to 50% inaccurate. And 50% inaccuracy is, you might as well flip a coin. You know, and in the early days, a lot of the cases were diagnosed simply by symptoms.
Right.
You know, if you had one or more of these and
Yeah.
one or more of these, and that's likely what it was.
I mean, the only symptom I know of that's kind of definitive for COVID is the loss of taste and smell.
Loss of
That's the
taste
one
and
that
smell.
kind of stands out as a unique, you know, standalone
Yep.
symptom that would say, yeah, this is probably.
Yeah, if you compare the flu, influenza symptoms to COVID symptoms, that's the only difference.
Right.
You know, and you know, the flu does have a death rate associated with it.
A fairly significant one.
You know, and it varies by year, by strain. It varies. Now, I wanted to look into this, so I went to the CDC, and all of this information is there. I mean, I can give you the website if someone doesn't believe that these came from the CDC.
Yeah, it's
I've got
readily
it right
available
here.
raw data.
It's a very long website with a lot of capital and small letters and symbols in it. But if you want it, you can call me. I'll give it to you after the show. But they broke it down by age groups: 0 to 17, 18 to 29, 30 to 39, and so on and so forth. Well, they're claiming that there are roughly 603,000 deaths attributable to COVID. Now, we know that the number has been overreported, anywhere from 10 to 50%.
Well, first of all, when they say with COVID, not of COVID. Now, that's a
With
subtle,
COVID.
but right.
Absolutely.
That's like Hawaiian Punch advertising made with 100% real fruit juice. Well, okay, you got 5 drops in there. That's made with. I mean, that's meaningless. It's all sugar water.
Exactly.
That kind of legerdemain, that kind of deceptive language is why we can't trust any of what we see and read and hear.
That is so true. That is so true. And people wonder why we conspiracy theorists don't trust the numbers.
That's right.
Why we don't trust Dr. Fauci. I'm sorry, if you lie to me, then you're a liar.
That's
it
right.
takes many years.
Regardless of your motivation, a noble lie is a lie nonetheless. It means I can't trust, you know, what you say to me. I don't care if you're doing, well, he's lying. He might be lying, but it's for my own good. It still means you're lying.
Right.
And I don't
You're
know,
lying.
and I'm not convinced you are interested in what's good for me. And I don't know how you would know that, frankly. You're not omniscient, so, lying is lying in this context, and he's blown his credibility
He has.
in spades.
Because he's admitted twice that he lied.
That's right.
Because
at least twice.
At least twice.
Yeah, I think he's been caught on a major third one that he hadn't admitted
yeah.
to, but the NIH was funding gain-of-function research at Wuhan and in other places. He's guilty of that. He knows he's guilty of that. Rand Paul's called him on it, and in case anybody missed it, Rand Paul made a criminal referral
Yes,
to
for
the
a criminal
DOJ
referral, yeah.
for that. Won't go anywhere because it's about Biden DOJ,
Well,
but
that's
he
right.
did do it.
Yes, he did. I have to hand him, I have to give him high marks for
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Speaking of the evidence against Fauci and all of that, they recently released some previously redacted email
Yeah, I saw that too.
in which he is openly discussed that they were helping and assisting in the funding of that, not just in the funding, but in actually participating in being partners to the research on gain of function.
Right.
And gain of function is why we have this situation in the U.S. right now.
Agreed.
Now, I looked at all these numbers. 603,000 is what they claim. All right. Now,
And that's for the 17, which age bracket?
that's for all age brackets.
Okay,
All age
right.
brackets.
Excess deaths due to COVID. all age bracket.
603,000. That's
Yeah.
correct. That's correct. So I looked at all these numbers, and there are a lot of numbers, and you can sit down with an Excel spreadsheet, and you can play with these numbers and look at various things. Some of them are relevant, some of them are not. But the current population of the United States is 333 million as of Saturday, July 31st.
Not counting all the illegals that we're not counting.
Well, not counting the illegals that are coming in. We know we have at least 1.1 million more
Than we
that
did.
come in,
Right.
and we don't know how many more on top of that came
That's
in
right. Undocumented. That's right.
Undocumented, yeah.
Unrecorded.
It was 1.1 million that were caught and released.
Yeah.
So, all right, we have 333 million people in this country. Roughly 2.8 million people die every year in, year out.
For various
Sometimes it's a little
reasons.
more, for all causes.
All the
various
causes.
reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It just depends. That's roughly 7,000 per day. That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. And if we look at most of these numbers that they compile, the one just glaring deception in this whole thing is they're taking a 15-month period and reporting it annually as a 12-month period.
You're saying they're taking 15 months of accumulated
COVID data,
excess
accumulated,
right,
yes.
deaths, and using annual metrics to measure and calculate percentages and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So basically, they're not scaling the 15. They should be saying 12 divided by 15 times that number and
Correct.
using that number. And you're saying they're not really doing
They're
that.
not doing that. In fact,
Interesting.
WRAL recently released an article claiming that there are 16,320 excess deaths in North Carolina. All right. Well, that's based on average annual deaths in North Carolina, which there are 96,000 average deaths in North Carolina, year in, year out. That's an average.
Roughly 100,000 people a year die from
Roughly 100,000 a year.
all causes.
All causes. Now, if we take and we extend that out to 15 months, that's 120,000. All right. We have had roughly 112,000 with COVID deaths in North Carolina
Over that 15-month period.
over that period. So we should have had 120,000.
Right, so that implies a reduction,
But
actually.
we've only had
Right, so
112,000
that's actually a
deaths.
below average year for all causes deaths, is what that says,
It is.
right?
It is.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I didn't believe it. I said,
Right.
well, I've certainly got something wrong in my numbers here. That can't be. So I went out and did a search.
Sounds like
on-
voting math.
It does.
Can't believe it. Something's wrong.
So I went out and did a search. I did not do a Google search. I use Google seldom. I did a DuckDuckGo search because I prefer DuckDuckGo because they're not tracking us as much as Google is.
I would say, boy, that's a silly sounding name, but so is Google, so they kind of,
Yeah, I don't know who came up with DuckDuckGo, but anyway, that's what I use as my browser, or as my search engine, rather. And lo and behold, what do I find? A page full of North Carolina's excess death rate is down. Now, that is a shocker, and yet we have WRAL, who is known to embellish a story occasionally, or is that as a rule?
Right.
Occasionally as a rule.
Or obfuscate.
Exactly. They're saying, oh, yeah, we got 16,320 excess deaths this year because of COVID. Well, first of all, this year is not completed.
Right.
Number two, this year that's not this year. That's over the 15-month period that we've been in the COVID pandemic. So it doesn't wash.
Well, the numbers, and this is true in any endeavor, and this is why it's so easy to baffle people with numbers. But if you don't understand or establish the underlying assumptions on which those numbers are used or made, or those calculations are made, it's meaningless.
It is.
Garbage in, garbage out is the old computer programmers mantra.
Now, I would like to address this. Right now they're forcing masks into the schools.
Yeah.
Want all school children to wear masks.
Which is irrational.
It's irrational because in the 0 to 17-year-olds, in this whole thing, over 15 months of COVID, 340 are termed COVID deaths in that age group, 0 to 17. 340 out of 333 million.
Right. And I dare say that in that age bracket, a lot more of them die from car accidents, drinking accidents, drownings, other ill-advised behavior, mostly self-inflicted wounds, because that's what young people do. And then maybe a few other things. They're not the ones. Now that cohort's not dying of cancer. They're too young.
That's right.
They're dying of foolishness. Typically,
exactly
self-inflicted.
Right.
Partying and then the occasional rare thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And unfortunately, we're out of time. But don't believe me. Go to the CDC. Go to North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. Go to the FDA. It's all there.
And do some of your own calculation, because I'll tell you, the people that are doing these calculations and presenting them to you, they're not that thorough, and a lot of times they're not that sharp.
They are not.
Yeah.
So we're out of time, unfortunately. This hour is the fastest hour of the week.
It is.
So we'll be back next week for more America in Danger. I'm Robert Cressionnie.
I'm John Gatsis.
And look for yourself. Thanks for watching.